Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Raven's Readings. Over the next couple of months, I'll be reading from Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town by the Canadian humorist Stephen Leacock. He wrote this in 1912 as an imaginative and ironic portrayal of Mariposa. It's a fictional small town in Canada modeled after Orillia, Ontario, where he spent many summers. I do readings twice a week, Tuesdays and Fridays, so this story should take about 6 weeks. If you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoyed this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. We'd paused last time mid-chapter, leaving Mr. Smith waiting to hear if his hotel's liquor license would be renewed. Chapter 1 continued. He looked alternately up the street, down it again, hauled out his watch from the depths of his embroidered pocket, and examined the hour hand and the minute hand and the second hand with frowning scrutiny. Then, wearily, and as one mindful that a hotel man is ever the servant of the public, he turned back into the hotel. "Billy," he said to the desk clerk, "if a wire comes, bring it into the bar parlor." The voice of Mr. Smith is of a deep guttural, such as Plancombe or Edouard Varesque might have obtained had they had the advantages of the hotel business. And with that, Mr. Smith, as was his custom in off moments, joined his guests in the back room. His appearance, to the untrained eye, was merely that of an extremely stout hotel keeper walking from the rotunda to the back bar. In reality, Mr. Smith was on the eve of one of the most brilliant and daring strokes ever effected in the history of licensed liquor. When I say that it was out of the agitation of the situation that Smith's Ladies and Gents Cafe originated, anybody who knows Mariposa will understand the magnitude of the moment. Mr. Smith then moved slowly from the doorway of the hotel through the rotunda, or more simply the front room with the desk and the cigar case in it, so to the bar, and thence to the little room or back bar behind it. In this room, as I have said, the brightest minds of Mariposa might commonly be found in the quieter part of a summer afternoon. Today there was a group of 4 who looked up as Mr. Smith entered, and was somewhat sympathetically and evidently aware of the perplexities of the moment. Henry Mullins and George Duff, the 2 bank managers, were both present. Mullins is a rather short, rather round, smooth-shaven man of less than 40, wearing one of those round banking suits of pepper and salt with a round banking hat of hard straw, and with the kind of gold tie-pin and heavy watch chain and seals necessary to inspire confidence in matters of foreign exchange. Duff is just as round and just as short and equally smooth-shaven, while his seals and straw hat are calculated to prove that the commercial is just as sound as bank as the exchange. From the technical point of view of the banking business, neither of them had any objection to being at Smith's Hotel or taking a drink as long as the other was present. This, of course, was one of the cardinal principles of Mariposa banking. Then there was Mr. Diston, the high school teacher, commonly known as the one who drank. None of the other teachers ever entered a hotel unless accompanied by a lady or protected by a child, but as Mr. Diston was known to drink beer on occasions and to go in and out of the Mariposa House and Smith's Hotel, he was looked upon as a man whose life was a mere wreck. Whenever the school board raised the salaries of the other teachers $50 or $60 per annum at one lift, it was well understood that public morality wouldn't permit an increase for Mr. Diston. Still more noticeable, perhaps, was the quiet, sallow-looking man dressed in black, with black gloves and with black silk hat heavily craped and placed hollow-side up on a chair. This was Mr. Golgotha Gingham, the undertaker of Mariposa, and his dress was due to the fact that he had just come from what he called an interment. Mr. Gingham had the true spirit of his profession, and such words as funeral or coffin or hearse never passed his lips. He always spoke of interments, of caskets and coaches, using terms that were calculated rather to bring out the majesty and sublimity of death rather than to parade its horrors. To be present at the hotel was in accord with Mr. Gingham's general conception of his business. No man had ever grasped the true principles of undertaking more thoroughly than Mr. Gingham. I have often heard it explained that to associate with the living, uninteresting though they appear, is the only way to secure the custom of the dead. Get to know people really well while they're alive, said Mr. Gingham. Be friends with them, close friends. And then when they die, you don't need to worry. You'll get the order every time. So naturally, as the moment was one of sympathy, it was Mr. Gingham who spoke first. What'll you do, Josh, he said, if the commissioners go against you? Boys, said Mr. Smith, I don't rightly know. If I have to quit, the next move is to the city. But I don't reckon I will have to quit. I've got an ID that I think is good every time. Could you run the hotel in the city? Asked Mullins. I could, said Mr. Smith. I'll tell you, there's big things doing in the hotel business right now, big chances if you go into it right. Hotels in the city are branching out. While you take the dining room side of it, continued Mr. Smith, looking round the group, there's thousands in it. The old plan's all gone. People won't eat now in an ordinary dining room with high ceilings and windows. You got to get them down underground in a room with no windows and lots of sawdust round and waiters that can't speak English. I seen them places last time I was in the city. They call them rats coolers. And for light meals, they want a caf, a real French caf, and for folks that come in late, another place that they call a girl room that don't shut up at all. If I go to the city, that's the kind of place I mean to run. What's yours call? It's on the house. It was just at the moment when Mr. Smith said that Billy, the desk clerk, entered the room with the telegram in his hand. But stop. It's impossible for you to understand the anxiety with which Mr. Smith and his associates awaited the news from the commissioners without first realizing the astounding progress of Mr. Smith in the past 3 years and the pinnacle of public eminence to which he had attained. Mr. Smith had come down from the lumber company of the Spanish River, where the divide is toward Hudson Bay, back north as they call it in Mariposa. He had been, it was said, a cook in the lumber shanties. To this day, Mr. Smith can fry an egg on both sides with a lightness of touch that is to despair of his own help. After that, he'd run a river driver's boarding house. After that, he had taken a food contract for a gang of railroad navvies on the Transcontinental. And after that, of course, the whole world was open to him. He came down to Mariposa and bought out the inside of what had been the Royal Hotel. Those who are educated understand that by the inside of a hotel is meant everything except the 4 outer walls of it. The fittings, the furniture, the bar, Billy the desk clerk, 3 dining room girls, and above all, the license granted by King Edward VII and ratified further by King George for the sale of intoxicating liquors. Till then, the Royal had been a mere nothing. At Smith's Hotel, it broke into a blaze of effulgence. From the first, Mr. Smith, as a proprietor, was a wild, rapturous success. He had all the qualifications. He weighed 280 pounds. He could haul 2 drunken men out of the bar, each by the scruff of the neck, without the faintest anger or excitement. He carried money enough in his trousers pockets to start a bank and spend it on anything, bet it on anything, and gave it away by handfuls. He was never drunk, and as a point of chivalry to his customers, never quite sober. Anybody was free of the hotel who came to come in. Anybody who didn't like it could go out. Drinks of all kinds cost 5 cents or 6 for a quarter. Meals and beds were practically free. Any persons foolish enough to go to the desk and pay for them, Mr. Smith charged according to the expression of their faces. At first, the loafers and the shantymen settled down on the place in a shower. But that was not the trade that Mr. Smith wanted. He knew how to get rid of them. An army of charwomen turned into the hotel, scrubbed it from top to bottom. A vacuum cleaner, the first seen in Mariposa, hissed and screamed in the corridors. 40 brass beds were imported from the city, not, of course, for the guests to sleep in, but to keep them out. A bartender with a starched coat and wicker sleeves was put behind the bar. The loafers were put out of business. The place had become too high-toned for them. To get the high-class trade, Mr. Smith set himself to dress the part. He wore wide-cut coats of filmy serge, light as gossamer, checkered waistcoats with a pattern for every day of the week, fedora hats light as autumn leaves, four-in-hand ties of saffron and myrtle green with a diamond pin the size of a hazelnut. On his fingers there were as many gems as would grace a native prince of India. Across his waistcoat lay a gold watch chain in huge square links, and in his pocket a gold watch that weighed 1.5 pounds and marked minutes, seconds, and quarter seconds. Just to look at Josh Smith's watch brought in at least 10 men at the bar every evening. Every morning, Mr. Smith was shaved by Jefferson Thorpe across the way. All that art could do, all that Florida water could effect, was lavished on his person. Mr. Smith became a local character. Mariposa was at his feet. All the reputable businessmen drank at Mr. Smith's bar, and in the little parlor behind it you might find at any time a group of the brightest intellects in the town. Not but what there was opposition at first. The clergy, for example, who accepted the Mariposa House and the Continental as a necessary and useful evil, looked askance at the blazing lights and the surging crowd of Mr. Smith's saloon. They preached against him. When the Reverend Dean Drone led off with a sermon on the text, "Lord, be merciful even unto this publican," Matthew 6, it was generally understood as an invitation to strike Mr. Smith dead. In the same way, the sermon at the Presbyterian Church the week after was on the text, "Lo, what now doth Abiram in the land of Melchizedek," Kings 8 and 9, and it was perfectly plain that what was meant was, lo, what was Josh Smith doing in Mariposa? But this opposition had been countered by a wide and sagacious philanthropy. I think Mr. Smith first got the idea of that on the night when the steam merry-go-round came to Mariposa. Just below the hostelry, on an empty lot, it whirled and whistled, steaming forth its tunes on the summer evening, while the children crowded round it in hundreds. Down the street strolled Mr. Smith, wearing a soft fedora to indicate that it was evening. "What do you charge for a ride, boss?" said Mr. Smith. "2 for a nickel," said the man. "Take that," said Mr. Smith, handing out a $10 bill from a roll of money, and ride the little folks free all evening. That night the merry-go-round whirled madly till after midnight, freighted to capacity with Mariposa children, while up in Smith's hotel, parents, friends, and admirers, as the news spread, were standing 4 deep along the bar. They sold $40 worth of lager alone that night, and Mr. Smith learned, if he had not already suspected it, the blessedness of giving. The uses of philanthropy went further. Mr. Smith subscribed to everything, joined everything, gave to everything. He became an Oddfellow, a Forester, a Knight of Pythias, and a workman. He gave $100 to the Mariposa Hospital and $100 to the Young Men's Christian Association. He subscribed to the ball club, the lacrosse club, the curling club, to anything, in fact, and especially to all those things which needed premises to meet in and grew thirsty in their discussions. As a consequence, the Oddfellows held their annual banquet at Smith's Hotel, and the oyster supper the Knights of Pythias was celebrated in Mr. Smith's dining room. Even more effective, perhaps, were Mr. Smith's secret benefactions, the kind of giving done by stealth of which not a soul in town knew anything, often for a week after it was done. It was in this way that Mr. Smith put the new font in Dean Drone's church and handed over $100 to Judge Pepperleigh for the unrestrained use of the Conservative Party. So it came about that, little by little, the antagonism had died down. Smith's Hotel became an accepted institution in Mariposa. Even the temperance people were proud of Mr. Smith as a sort of character who added distinction to the town. There were moments in the earlier quiet of the morning when Dean Drone would go so far as to step into the rotunda and collect a subscription. As for the Salvation Army, they ran in and out all the time unreproved. On only one point, difficulty still remained. That was the closing of the bar. Mr. Smith could never bring his mind to it, not as a matter of profit, but as a point of honor. It was too much for him to feel that Judge Pepperleigh might be out on the sidewalk thirsty at midnight, that the night hands of the Times Herald on Wednesday night might be compelled to go home dry. On this point, Mr. Smith's moral code was simplicity itself. Do what is right and take the consequences. So the bar stayed open. Every town, I suppose, has its meaner spirits. In every genial bosom some snake is warmed, or as Mr. Smith put it to Golgotha Gingham, "There's some fellers even in this town skunks enough to inform." At first the Mariposa court quashed all indictments. The presiding judge, with his spectacles on and a pile of books in front of him, threatened the informer with the penitentiary. The whole bar of Mariposa was with Mr. Smith, but by sheer iteration, the informations had proved successful. Judge Pepperleigh learned that Mr. Smith had subscribed $100 for the Liberal Party. and I once fined him for keeping open after hours. That made one conviction. On the top of this had come the untoward incident just mentioned, and that made two. Beyond that was the deluge. This then was the exact situation when Billy, the desk clerk, entered the back bar with the telegram in his hand. "Here's your wire, sir," he said. "What does it say?" said Mr. Smith. He always dealt with written documents with a fine air of detachment. I don't suppose there were 10 people in Mariposa that knew that Mr. Smith couldn't read. Billy opened the message and read, "Commissioners give you 3 months to close down." "Let me read it," said Mr. Smith. "That's right, 3 months to close down." There was dead silence when the message was read. Everybody waited for Mr. Smith to speak. Mr. Gingham instinctively assumed the professional air of hopeless melancholy. As it was afterwards recorded, Mr. Smith stood and studied with the tray in his hand for at least 4 minutes. Then he spoke. "Boys," he said, "I'll be darned if I close down till I'm ready to close down. I've got an ID. You wait and I'll show you." And beyond that, not another word did Mr. Smith say on the subject. But within 48 hours, the whole town knew that something was doing. The hotel swarmed with carpenters, bricklayers, and painters. There was an architect up from the city with a bundle of blueprints in his hand. There was an engineer taking the street level with a theodolite, and a gang of navvies with shovels digging like furies, as if to dig out the back foundations of the hotel. "That'll fool 'em," said Mr. Smith. Half the town was gathered round the hotel, crazy with excitement. But not a word would the proprietors say. Great dray loads of square timber and 2x8 pine joists kept arriving from the planing mill. There was a pile of match spruce 16 feet high lying by the sidewalk. Then the excavation deepened, and the dirt flew, and the beams went up, and the joists across, and all the day from dawn till dusk the hammers of the carpenters clattered away, working overtime at time and a half. "Don't matter what it costs," said Mr. Smith. "Get it done." Rapidly the structure took form. It extended down the side street, joining the hotel at a right angle. Spacious and graceful it looked as it reared its uprights into the air. Already you could see the place where the row of windows was to come, a veritable palace of glass it must be, so wide and commodious were they. Below it you could see the basement shaping itself, with a low ceiling like a vault and big beams running across it, dressed smooth and ready for staining. Already in the street there were 7 crates of red and white awning. And even then nobody knew what it was, and it was not until the 17th day that Mr. Smith, in the privacy of the back bar, broke the silence and explained. "I'll tell you, boys," he says. "It's a calf, like what they have in the city, a ladies' and gents' calf. And underneath, what's yours, Mr. Millins, is a rat's cooler. And when I get her started, I'll hire a French chief to do the cooking, and for the winter I'll put in a girl room like what they have in the city hotels. And I'd like to see who's going to close her up then." Within 2 more weeks, the plan was in operation. Not only was the calf built, but the very hotel was transformed. Awnings had broken out in a red and white cloud upon its face. Its every window carried a box of hanging plants, and above in glory floated the Union Jack. The very stationery was changed. The place was now Smith's Summer Pavilion. It was advertised in the city as Smith's Tourist Emporium and Smith's Northern Health Resort. Mr. Smith got the editor of the Times-Herald to write up a circular all about ozone in the Mariposa pine woods, with illustrations of the Maskinonge, Piscis mariposis, and of Lake Wassanati. The Saturday after that circular hit the city in July, there were men with fishing rods and landing nets pouring in on every train, almost too fast to register. And if, in the face of that, a few drops of whiskey were sold over the bar, well, who thought of it? But the calf, that, of course, was the crowning glory of the thing. That and the rat's cooler below. Light and cool, with swinging windows open to the air, tables with marble tops, palms, waiters in white coats. It was the standing marvel of Mariposa. Not a soul in the town, except Mr. Smith, who knew it by instinct, ever guessed that waiters and palms and marble tables can be rented over the long-distance telephone. Mr. Smith was as good as his word. He got a French chief with an aristocratic saturnine countenance and a mustache and imperial that recalled the late Napoleon III. No one knew where Mr. Smith got him. Some people in the town said he was a French marquis. Others said he was a count and explained the difference. No one in Mariposa had ever seen anything like the calf. All down the side of it were the grill fires with great pewter dish covers that went up and down on a chain, and you could walk along the road and actually pick out your own cutlet and then see the French marquis throw it on the broiling iron, and you could watch a buckwheat pancake whirled into existence under your eyes and see fowls' legs deviled and peppered and grilled and tormented till they lost all semblance to the original Mariposa chicken. Mr. Smith, of course, was in his glory. "What have you got today, Alf?" he'd say as he strolled over to the marquee. The name of the chief was, I believe, Alphonse, but Alf was near enough for Mr. Smith. And the marquis would extend to the proprietor of the menu, "Voilà, monsieur, la carte du jour." Mr. Smith, by the way, encouraged the use of the French language in the calf. He viewed it, of course, solely in its relation to the hotel business, and I think regarded it as a recent invention. "It's come in all the time in the city," he said, "and you ain't expected to understand it." Mr. Smith would take the cart between his finger and thumb and stare at it. It was all covered with such devices as potage la Mariposa and filet mignon à la propriétaire and côtelette à la Smith and so on. But the greatest thing about the calf were the prices. Therein lay, as everybody saw at once, the hopeless simplicity of Mr. Smith. The prices stood fast at 25 cents a meal. You could come in and eat all they had in the calf for a quarter. "No, sir," Mr. Smith said stoutly, "I ain't going to try to raise no prices on the public. The hotel's always been a quarter, and the calf's a quarter." "Full? Full of people? Well, I should think so. From the time the calf opened at 11 till it closed at 8:30, you could hardly find a table. Tourists, visitors, travelers, half the people of Mariposa crowded at the little tables, crockery rattling, glasses tinkling on trays, corks popping, the waiters in their white coats flying to and fro, Alphonse whirling the cutlets and pancakes into the air, and in and through it all Mr. Smith in a white flannel suit and a broad chrism sash about his waist, crowded and gay from morning to night, and even noisy in its hilarity. Noisy? Yes, but you wanted deep, quiet, and cool. If you wanted to step from the glare of a Canadian August to the deep shadow of an enchanted glade, walk down below into the Rat's Cooler. There you had it. Dark old beams. Who could believe they were put there a month ago? Great casks set on end with legends such as Amontillado Fino done in gilt on a black ground. Tall steins filled with German beer soft as moss, and a German waiter noiseless as moving foam. He who entered the Rat's Cooler at 3 of a summer afternoon was buried there for the day. Mr. Golgotha Gingham spent anything from 4 to 7 hours there every day. In his mind, the place had all the quiet charm of internment with none of its sorrows. But at night, when Mr. Smith and Billy, the desk clerk, opened up the cash register and figured out the combined losses of the calf and the Rat's Cooler, Mr. Smith would say, "Billy, just wait till I get the license renewed. I'll close up this damn calf so tight they'll never know what hit her. What did that lamb cost? 50 cents a pound, was it? I figure at Billy that every one of them hogs eats about $1 worth of grub for every 25 cents they pay for it. As for Alf, oh, by gosh, I'm through with him." But that, of course, was only a confidential matter as between Mr. Smith and Billy. I don't know at what precise period it was that the idea of a petition to the license commissioners first got about the town. No one seemed to know just who suggested it, but certainly it was that public opinion began to swing strongly towards the support of Mr. Smith. I think it was perhaps on the day after the big fish dinner that Alphonse cooked for the Mariposa Canoe Club, at 20 cents a head, that the feeling began to find open expression. People said it was a shame that a man like Josh Smith should be run out of Mariposa by 3 license commissioners. Who were the license commissioners anyway? Why, look at the license system they had in Sweden, and yes, in Finland, and in South America. Or for that matter, look at the French and Italians who drank all day and night. Aren't they all right? Aren't they a musical people? Or take Napoleon and Victor Hugo, drunk half the time, and yet look at what they did. I quote these arguments not for their own sake, but merely to indicate the changing temper of public opinion in Mariposa. Men would sit in the cafe after lunch, perhaps for an hour and a half, and talk about the license question in general, and then go down into the Rat's Cooler and talk about it for 2 hours more. It was amazing the way the light broke in the case of particular individuals, often the most unlikely, and quelled their opposition. Take, for example, the editor of the news packet. I suppose there wasn't a greater temperance advocate in town. Yet Alphonse queered him with an omelette à la licence in one meal. Or take Pepperley himself, the judge of the Mariposa court. He was put to the bad with a game pie, pâté normand en fine herbe, the real thing, as good as a trip in Paris itself. After eating it, Pepperley had the common sense to realize that it was sheer madness to destroy a hotel that could cook a thing like that. In the same way, the secretary of the school board was silenced with a stuffed duck à la Ossawippi. 3 members of the town council were converted with a dindon farci à la Joe Smith. And finally, Mr. Diston persuaded Dean Drone to come, and as soon as Mr. Smith and Alphonse saw him, they landed him with a fried flounder that even the apostles would have appreciated. After that, everyone knew that the license question was practically settled. The petition was all over town. It was printed in duplicate of the news packet, and you could see it lying on the counter of every shop in Mariposa. Some of the people signed it 20 or 30 times. It was the right kind of document, too. It began, whereas in the bounty of Providence the earth putteth forth her luscious fruits, and her vineyards for the delight and enjoyment of mankind. It made you thirsty just to read it. Any man who read that petition over was wild to get to the rat schooler. When it was all signed up, they had nearly 3,000 names on it. Then Nivens the lawyer and Mr. Gingham, as a provincial official, took it down to the county town, and by 3 o'clock that afternoon the news had gone out from the long-distance telephone office that Mr. Smith's license was renewed for 3 years. Rejoicings? Well, I should think so. Everybody was down wanting to shake hands with Mr. Smith. They told him he'd done more to boom Mariposa than any 10 men in town. Some of them said he ought to run for the town council, and others wanted to make him the Conservative candidate for the next Dominion election. The calf was a mere babble of voices, and even the rat schooler was almost floated away from its moorings. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Smith found time to say to Billy, the desk clerk, "Take the cash registers out of the calf and the rat schooler and start counting up the books." And Billy said, "Will I write the letters for the palms and the tables and the stuff to go back?" And Mr. Smith said, "Get 'em written right away." So all evening the laughter and the chatter and the congratulations went on, and it wasn't until long after midnight that Mr. Smith was able to join Billy in the private room behind the rotunda. Even when he did, there was a quiet and a dignity about his manner that had never been there before. I think it must have been the new halo of the Conservative candidacy that was already radiating from his brow. It was, I imagine, at this very moment that Mr. Smith first realized that the hotel business formed the natural and proper threshold of the national legislature. "Here's the account of the cash registers," said Billy. "Let me see it," said Mr. Smith. And he studied the figures without a word. "And here's the letters about the palms, and here's Alphonse up to yesterday." And then an amazing thing happened. "Billy," said Mr. Smith, "tear 'em up." "I'm going to do it. It ain't right, and I won't do it. They got me the license for to keep the calf, and I'm going to keep the calf. I don't need to close her. The bar is good for anything from 40 to 100 a day now with the rat schooler going, and that calf will stay right there." And stay it did. There it stands, mind you, to this day. You've only got to step round the corner of Smith's Hotel on the side street and read the sign, "Ladies and Gents Cafe," just as large and as imposing as ever. Mr. Smith said he'd keep the calf, and when he said a thing, he meant it. Of course, there were changes, small changes. I don't say, mind you, that the filet de beef that you get there now is perhaps quite up to the level of the filet de boeuf aux champignons of the days of glory. No doubt the lamb chops in Smith's calf are often very much the same nowadays as the lamb chops of the Mariposa House or the Continental. Of course, things like omelette aux truffles practically died out when Alphonse went, and naturally the leaving of Alphonse was inevitable. No one knew just when he went or where, but one morning he was gone. Mr. Smith said that Alf had to go back to his folks in the old country. So, too, when Alf left, the use of the French language as such fell off tremendously in the calf. Even now they use it to some extent. You can still get filet de beef and saucisson au juice, but Billy the desk clerk has considerable trouble with the spelling. The rat schooler, of course, closed down, or rather Mr. Smith closed it for repairs, and there's every likelihood that it will hardly open for 3 years. But the calf is there. They don't use the grills because there's no need to, with the hotel kitchen so handy. The grill room, I may say, was never opened. Mr. Smith promised it. It is true for the winter and still talks of it, but somehow there's been a sort of feeling against it. Everyone in town admits that every big hotel in the city has a girl room and must be all right. Still, there's a certain, well, you know how sensitive opinion is in a place like Mariposa. End of chapter. Sounds like a win after all. A bit of a come down from the days of glory, but Smith's Hotel is still a success. Remember to let me know what your preferences are for readings, and if you subscribe to my newsletter, you'll get notified of my updates as soon as they're ready. If you enjoy this reading or have other classics you'd like to hear, leave me a comment. Check out my other posts on my Substack at ravensview.substack.com. And remember to share this with your friends. Ta-ta for now.